As Bo's already said, I approach literary ideas from a certain perspective. So tonight's talk, these will be the 4 labels that we will discuss. And this is a slide that you will see more than once, so don't worry if you don't get it all in the first time. As any good student of Cicero would do, I will refer back to these several times. So, hold on your hats. If you hate literary theory, you can turn off your brains, but please do not use your technology to distract yourself from this part of the talk. Thank you very much. So, I must tell you that I'm framing these discussions within the work of French feminist literary theory, which grows from the work of this guy, Jacques Lacan. And Lacan says that there are 3 things that one must know about the identity search for who am I and why am I here. So the 3 terms that are important are the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic. The real is that thing that we can't touch that hovers above everything. You could think of it as God, but that's not what we're thinking it of. But it is the thing that cannot be explained by language or any logos or science system that we as humans possess. It's that thing that we're always striving for and want the approval of, which leads us to the imaginary. The imaginary is a moment in life where we are absent from what they call lack. It's when we don't know any better, when we don't know that there's something inside of us that might be missing, because no one has told us it's missing. Or we haven't read a piece of literature and decided, I thought I was this kind of person, but after reading this literature or seeing this film, symbolic discourse, which is the rules of language and the uses of language in society, and they're specific to the society and culture that you're born into. Once you enter the symbolic, you can talk, and you understand what words and signs and symbols mean, you understand that you actually are not the entire universe. So there's a lot of research out there about babies in this moment. It's called the mirror phase. That's all you're getting. Lacan in a nutshell, tiny. You could spend a whole semester on this and still not get it. The quote at the top is very important. It's from the brilliant scholar Tormoy, who also works in the Carolinas, who says that she comes from the point of view that you cannot create a new and different symbolic order than the one that you're born into. You must use the language, the signs, and the symbols that you're born to. And she doesn't want to, as someone like who might do, rewrite language and change the rules of language. And I agree with her. I think if you're going to study ancient literature, you bring your own ideas to it, but you also have to acknowledge the rules of the language in which it's written. Christel was a student of Lacan, and she took his ideas regarding identity and said that it can all be boiled down to a very linear idea. The competition between 2 points, the semiotic and the symbolic. And she said that life is a series of discourse with 1 or 2 positions. And there's a lot that's been done on this, and we could talk about Hegel, and we could talk about the dialectic and how there's the powerful and the weak position. We could do that, but we're not going to do that tonight because I think you would probably pull your hair. But I will tell you this. I agree with her. We are born into a system that privileges phallic discourse. Don't everybody freak out. Phallic discourse means that there is a powerful and a not powerful position in situations. That there is a language that is powerful and mighty, and then there are those who cannot manipulate that language or understand that language. It's true. It is. So where do I fit in? Well, what I say is this. I don't know how many of you know a lot of people. I think we all do. Look around us. But I would say that I have never described anyone, their journey through life, who they are, what they hope to be, in terms of a linear progression. I have never described a work of literature as a simple linear narrative. I believe in a more organic connection between words and our search for ourselves, whether it be film, whether it be art that's painted, sculpted, scrawled on the ground, scrawled in a cave, and then the written word. So what is it that I've taken from them and what do I do with it? So I have to acknowledge the math department. for your props. Thank you very much. And Frances Balkin for the use of her project she made for math class. So what I say is this. We are all composed of many different parts of dialectic encounters that don't remain linear. So Christel says that there's this third unit, the chora, that's introduced to Lacan's symbolic and semiotic relationship. And she says that that is where the important and interesting things happen with a human being. That just marks the moment where there's a rupture in either your identity or a struggle happens and what you thought was going to happen doesn't happen. Or a character in a piece of literature does not behave the way that you thought that character was going to behave. That is where a pathetic moment is introduced in this space. The chora comes from Plato's Timaeus, where he describes a gap. It's an empty space. You can fill it up with anything. So what I'm saying is there are lots of different kinds of woman that can go in this gap, but they're all woman with a capital W. So what happens if you take a dialectic and you introduce two more parts? You get this four-part shape. And then there's the real, which is the part we can't touch, that we can't know. It still hovers over all these interactions, and you have to think of it as a 3D representation. So you get this. So this is a piece of a human being in literature, or if you want to go the psychoanalytic route, real, living, breathing human beings. And if you take all of these and you say, well, I'm never just one thing. I'm not just a teacher, right? I'm not just a wife, a daughter, a person who lives in New York, right? I'm a lot of things. If you take these struggles, and they're not supposed to be negative, it's not supposed to be stressful to be alive, and you snap them together, point to point, what do you get? You get something that looks a lot like this. Okay? Well, what do I call this? I must call it something. I'm a literary theorist, right? I call this the bubble of subjectivity. Fancy, right? What is a bubble of subjectivity? It is the way that our lives expand and grow. This isn't a static size. It expands and contracts depending on your relationships, depending on your experiences in life. How do we apply this to literature? Characters expand and grow. Labels associated with them expand and grow. Women have been described in this way since antiquity. So that's the end of the theory part. Let's get down to the I say, the identity of woman is neither linear nor simply entangled in a binary struggle. Woman is most aptly represented as an ever-changing, three-dimensional sphere. The linguistic elements of this sphere are the four types for this evening. Because identity is not fixed, this sphere is in constant motion, simultaneously displaying various personae of an individual. I call this sphere the bubble of subjectivity, in order to demonstrate the organic shape of woman, and I mean capital W, and to highlight the volatile nature of women in literature. These types exist in many forms, and their usage changes depending on the culture in which the art or literature is created. Because these very labels are not static, they may be assiduously recycled by writers and artists. So this evening I will discuss these four types as representations of marginality in classical literature. As I began this investigation of establishment and disintegration of identity, the urge to discard this discussion of gender really signaled the primary reason that I should push forward with this study. Neither woman nor subject, and when I say subject, I mean person who has an identity in the world relative to other things. Neither of these things can be defined in concrete, unchanging terms. Domina-Virgin-Mater-Trix articulates the differences found in woman and confirms the fractal nature of identity. The connections between these labels have persisted since the earliest works of Western literature and constitute the matrix of female subjectivity that has dominated the West for over 2,000 years. So we're going to talk a little bit about Homer. Unfortunately, this has to be greatest hits. There's absolutely no way we can do everything. So here we go. In the Odyssey, we learn of the loyalty of wives, exemplified most notably by Penelope. True to Odysseus at all costs, she manages the household, raises their son, and holds off gluttonous suitors. However, the role of Mater is not Penelope's only persona. The suitors certainly feel as if she unjustly deludes them and demands their patience when she should simply choose a new husband while her husband's away. Why not, right? In this way, Penelope behaves like a domina, labeled so later by Roman elegy. That's where we get the term domina used in this way, not until the Romans come along. Her manipulation of the suitors is essential to the preservation of her household, which happens also to be her husband's household. In order to continue her duties as Mater, Penelope must also behave like a domina. Evidence for other types of women may also be found in Homer's text. Circe, the enchantress, lives absent from the dominion of a man, and she regularly takes revenge on those who scorn her. Calypso also lives outside the confines of marriage. Both women are divine, and Homer's descriptions of them depict ladies who will stop at nothing to ensure their needs are met. Arguably, these immortal females demonstrate rapacious desires, usually associated with a marriage race. Helen, at Menelaus' side, is a vision of eloquence and seduction, but she still nurtures and mothers the inexperienced Telemachus when he comes there for guidance. So don't worry, we'll talk more about Helen later. Helen, at Menelaus' side, Nausicaa, the Phaeacian virgin, is described as loyal to her parents and willing to marry whomever they choose. She does not leave the household unattended, and yet she is assertive while speaking to Odysseus, clothes him, and takes him to her father. Nausicaa demonstrates the alluring charm of the maiden, we call virgin, which we know really only means unmarried, has no children. It does not mean that the person is not having sexual intercourse. It doesn't mean that. She is eloquent, lovely, naive, but chiefly she is submissive to the will of others. These characters demonstrate the pervasiveness of these types, Domina-Virgin-Mater-Trix, in the earliest sample of Western literature. So I'm going to fast forward to Roman elegy, and you're going to get a little bit of an idea of what happens in Latin classical and seminary. And the reason that I fast forward is this. Genre is secondary to this analysis. If you take a look at the handout that I left in your chair, or the calendar, which I made that for you, you'll see that I've given lectures and published work in other places on different topics that are relevant to this idea. And some of these involve fine art, some of these involve pop culture, and some of these also involve more literature. So this isn't limited to only epic or only elegy. Roman elegies, right? So the work that I'm going to focus on tonight is a poem by Catullus, 68b. We're only focusing on the second half of this poem. There's also a part called 68a, and there's heated debate about whether or not it's one long continuous poem or it's two poems that were jammed together in a manuscript. And that argument hinges on actually a name. And it's very unusual for a Roman man to be called by two different cognomen. So most scholars assume that 68a and 68b do not go together. And we're not going to discuss whether or not they do, because tonight we don't care about that. We care only about the mistress, right? The body of work regarding the poetry of the Roman elegists continues to inspire a variety of interpretations, and the identity of the elegiac mistress rests at the center of these debates. Catullus' use of myth in poem 68 situates the poetry within established literary tradition, and it is an example of the way myth, literature, and history converge as the poet crafts the beloved's identity. The description of the mistress vacillates among references to Venus, Laodamia, Helen, Hebe, and Juno. The mythical foundation in 68b creates an image of a multifaceted female who may simultaneously embody the characteristics of Domina-Virgin-Mater-Trix. The first mention of the feminine is of one who gives both pleasure and intense suffering. Now, I probably should have put this up here without the English. should be the Latin students telling you who that was. Venus is named such by her seat of worship. That's why it doesn't say Venus up here. Well, the poet says, you know the heartache that double-edged Venus, duplex, Amaltheia, has given to me, and how she scorched me. Venus, goddess of erotic love, had the ability to bring intense pleasure and suffering to lovers. The Roman elegists regularly complain of the pains of love, only to praise their condition later and vow to continually suffer as long as the mistress may one day yield. Scholars generally agree that this image relates to Venus's dealings in passionate affairs, because God's a working job, right? Fordyce, commentary, defines duplex as treacherous. The word may also mean two-faced or deceitful. All of the readings cast Venus as a dominating force who brings both odious and joyous events into the lover's life. I would also note that Venus is duplex in a more personal, practical way. She's both the goddess of erotic love and fertility, and she is always seen as the most sexually alluring goddess. But she is, in addition, the mother of Aeneas, the mythic founder of Rome. So we also have the image of Venus as a mother. After this, we encounter a simile of rushing water. The simile of rushing water that follows Venus's introduction as duplex reinforces the image of Venus's ability to soothe and nurture, because there's a contrast between hot and dry vocabulary and hot and cold and wet and dry vocabulary in these lines. So scholars say that they think this was inserted in this way to draw attention to the idea of being in love is like being tortured. One minute you're burning hot, the next minute you're freezing cold. More on that later. Elizabeth Vanderveer proposes that the water simile is closely related to Hercules' lore, and that's because later we're going to have another mention of Hercules in this poem. The images of hot and cold, combined with moist and dry, call to mind the hero's suffering. She cites Herodotus' mention of this and says that the river Dura spontaneously sprang up to ease his physical suffering, and notes that Strabo says the river was meant to cool him on his funeral pyre. So, do you all know the story of the immolation of the hero? So he's burning, and the river springs up to soothe him because he's going to be with them on Mount Olympus, but his mortal body must burn first, which is obviously very painful. Even if the reader does not know this reference, the simile suggests Catullus believes the torturous effects of love delivered by Venus, ardering, which is burning, incessant weeping, and gloomy torrential tears, will eventually bring him a sweet alleviation. And this is a common idea in elegy. This is the image of the servant of love, also defined in your handout, in which the poets claim that they would endure anything so that their mistress might yield to them, might give in, might go out on a date. But really, that doesn't happen. Ovid does, but that's a different discussion. It's violence in elegy for a different time. As a servant of love, Catullus reminds readers that Venus is his mistress, or his domina. Therefore, he willingly endures the sadistic game that she's playing with him. And if you've read the corpus, past and current students, you know that Catullus suffers a great deal, or at least he says he suffers a great deal. He whines a lot. Everything that happens is about him, and how horrible things are, and how everyone else is stupid, and how his life is in ruin, right? The mistress enters the home, so here she comes, finally, just as Laodamia, an impassioned bride. So that's in the top line up there. Flagrans amore. Flagrans modifies the word conjugis, the first word in that line. So it's a spouse, or in this case, a wife. Flagrans, burning, literally, present participle. Amore, with love. Her union was destined for ruin. Why? Laodamia was the young bride of Patroclus, the first Greek to fall in the Trojan War, and we hear the most famous example of this. We hear it from the Iliad in Book 2. Homer mentions Laodamia's mourning and seems to be the only remaining Greek source for this myth. There's a lot of Roman retellings of this myth, which I want to outline for you. They all have this in common. The Catullin portrait of Laodamia is a young woman whose marriage bed may not have been properly prepared. Our line compares the marriage bed of Laodamia to that of Penelope. So see, you can compare things in different genres. Noting that Odysseus, unlike Protesilaus, built his bridal chamber, quote, until he finished it, close quote. So he did all the proper rituals necessary to ensure a fruitful and happy marriage. Odysseus, of course, right? Greatest hero. The unfinished marriage chamber was a result of the young couple's desire to be together before he left for Troy. Once Protesilaus leaves and is killed, the bride is forced to lay aside her hopes for sanctioned, honorable love, which would have likely resulted in children, and then she has to resume a virginal role, although she's married. The image of a wife left unattended, who may fall prey to libidinous men, also figures into this scene. So she's entering, he describes it as if she is a bride. But there's more to the story of Laodamia, so they want readers to pause and reflect. What else is going on with this image? Why this image? Why not an image of Penelope? Why this image? Laodamia is traditionally cast as the ever-faithful wife. There are stories where she actually makes a wax likeness of her husband. She's so lonely for him. She's a very sad character. But Roman poets say something different about her. But I believe Catullus' retelling of this myth calls the fidelity of wives into question, because Catullus is, after all, writing about a clandestine meeting for sex and likening the act to a legitimate marriage. This is not a love poem written to his wife. This is a poem written thanking his friend for giving them a country villa to meet for their liaison. So he keeps using the vocabulary of marriage and a sanctioned relationship to describe relationships that's outside the walls of marriage. Offering Laodamia as an example of an elegiac mistress positions Catullus' liaison within the confines of accepted sexual interactions between husband and wife. Nevertheless, their meeting is on the margins of conventional behavior. This image of Laodamia also calls another scholar, Sharon Jane's ideas about the elegiac mistress, into question. She claims that the only identity for the women, who were the loves of these poets, is that they are meretrix. She says that there's no space for any other identity. Obviously, I can agree with her. Because this example is just one of many that proves that it's impossible to say that this person is simply a meretrix. And if you read more of their work, it's impossible to cast them in the line of only being a meretrix. Because a matrona of a household had just as much freedom to move about and do as she wished. So, poor Laodamia was taught by an absent husband that it was possible to live with a broken marriage. And the verb docta is very important because it's a way that the elegists describe the woman. A docta puella is a woman who is very educated and who is known for taking lovers if she wants or living independently for men if she wants. She's a dangerous female. She's educated. She's dangerous. It's also where we get the word doctor. So, the maiden whose sexual passion for her husband was not satiated by brief coupling with her husband is left. She's left to simmer with these feelings. However, as Propertius, another elegist notes, bear with me because I have to read this, it's too pretty. Even the dependable girl bends to continual provocations. So if you keep bothering her long enough, she might go out on a date. We have no proof of suitors for Laodamia, but it is likely that any woman left, in this case permanently, will be tempted to have a lover. According to Catullus, Laodamia lost her husband because of Helen's kidnap, brought to Elamai, literally the kidnap or the taking of Helen. So in this case, she's not called a bad person yet. Rather than continue the portrait of a woman left alone as her husband wages war and whose fidelity is unquestionable, who am I talking about from the Homeric passages? That's Helen's husband. Penelope. So, rather than talk about Penelope, he talks about Helen. Again, what? The story of Helen's affair and inevitable journey to Troy inspired authors to create a multifaceted image of Greece's most beautiful queen. Some label her a whore who manipulated men, much like Venus, and who willingly eloped with Paris. Others suggest that she may have been grudgingly removed from her home, or that a likeness or a spirit rather than Helen herself was taken, because people did not want to say Helen of Troy ran away with this guy, but she calls herself an adulteress in her own words. Later, Ovid crafts an image that acknowledges Helen's psychological dilemma in Heroides, his fictional letters between heroes and heroines. Whether or not she was willing, Bright says, quote, "The absence of Menelaus in Crete gave opportunities to the Trojan prince to corrupt the fidelity of Helen and to carry away home what the goddess of beauty had promised to him," close quote. Even if Helen wanted to go with Paris, he had no right to take her. She was the mother of Menelaus' child and belonged to his household. The affair between Paris and Helen was illegal. She was a stolen adulteress. By introducing Helen, Catullus hints that the mistress belongs to another person. Positioning this reference within the legend of Laodamia causes the reader to wonder if the poet's beloved is a young bride whose husband away and is too busy to take note of the danger. And there's something else in the previous lines. Catullus mentions, wrapped within his reference to Troy, his brother's death. And there's been a lot of debate about these lines as to whether or not they should even be in the poem, because it seems to not fit. Because he says, Troy, what is this? Common tomb of, yes. And it is the bitter ash part, literally, of all the men and virtue, like, yes, from Troy. So, why does he do this? He mentions this right after Helen, and then he goes right into this and says, this is that even he lost his brother. And he says, whoa, and this is lamentation. Not students, this is not dated singular. He says, "Woe, brother, stolen from pitiful or wretched me." Why? Why does he put in some sort of lamentation about his brother in the middle of these mythological references to these women? Well, the mention of his brother's death in Greece, and Greek men's rushing from their homes, draws attention to the countless wives and virgins, keepers of the hearth, abandoned while the men waged war. C.J. Tuplin acknowledges that this passage has caused considerable debate, so much that many have suggested its removal. He does not agree, noting that, quote, "One is still left with a puzzling emphasis on Troy as a symbol, which is hard to explain except in terms of Catullus' brother's death there," close quote. He goes on to say that Catullus wants the reader to see that he, like Laodamia, has suffered loss, because she knows how to live, so Laodamia knows how to live without the love of her spouse. So he's saying, I know how to live without the love of my brother. I understand what suffering is. Okay. Whatever the case, one message is clear. Carpe diem. Perhaps you're supposed to learn that you love while the opportunity exists. Laodamia took advantage of fleeting marital desire. But they didn't finish the rituals, did they? No. And her husband died. Yes. So now she's alone. Perhaps Catullus is suggesting that she loves someone else. The arrangement of the references, Troy, the tomb, the death of the brother, followed by Helen leads Laodamia into a pit. The heat, or the passion, engrossing you, these are the last 2 lines here, carried you down from such heights of love into a steep pit, he says to Laodamia. So Laodamia's passion for Protesilaus was pure, but the flame was not quenched. That same passion led her from the ultimate high, tanto vertique, which I say is marital sex, to a steep pit. The abrupt drop might be an affair with someone like Catullus and cause the water simile that we saw earlier to mind. Like the pure cooling spring that sprang forth from the mountain and traveled to the fields cracked open by heat, Laodamia has been carried, by circumstance, from a position of ease to one of suffering. So this is the opposite, right? Her love affair has brought her great suffering. Remember, duplex Venus can bring wonderful things and horrible things. The word barathrum implies that someone is stuck, right, in a pit. C.J. Tuplin says that this term, quote, symbolizes the original love of Laodamia for Protesilaus. I don't agree with him. I assert that her desire for Protesilaus may be found at tanto vertique because of the arrangement of the words. Such a great height of love. She begins, and there's communion at the beginning of that line. We begin with the love affair of a married couple, and then she falls into the pit. Because this original passion was not properly tamed, Laodamia was thrown down. She is stuck because unfulfilled passion drove her down. Her love is said to be deeper than the pits dug by Hercules and Phineus. In death, Hercules becomes immoral and is immediately married to Hebe, who instantly loses her virginity and causes a big argument with Juno, but we can't go into that because we don't have time, but let's just say that's pretty crappy, right? He gets to go be with the gods, and Hebe is married off to him without anyone asking, which opens the spot, by the way, for Ganymede, and we all know what happens there. Because then Zeus is going to go get Ganymede to be the cupbearer instead of Hebe. But that's a whole different, again, something else. So, Hebe could not keep virginity long, but your great love was deeper than that pit, which nevertheless taught you, wild girl, to bear the yoke. So, I love the arrangement of these lines. We follow Hebe from virginitate, virginity, through down to Laodamia's love, right? Altus amor, right? And it was all pure. Now, in Latin, the word altus means high or deep, depending on what you're talking about, because alta also means the deep of the ocean or the height of the mountain. So again, we have that duplex imagery. What do we like? And then right down, if you follow that line, to this image of Indomitan, very human woman. Indomitan is an unyielding girl. And it calls to mind a verb, a Greek verb, which means what? Dalmazo, to, and remember, break a horse, which is also the term to take home a wife in ancient Greek culture. Very sad image. Nonetheless, there it is. So she was taught, she learned, there's that verb again, dakuit. An unwilling maiden must be forced to wear the yoke because women who maintain their virginity too long were dangerous. Let's say the most famous instance of this from antiquity would be Antigone. All of you read it in dangerous maiden. Alan Miller wonders if Laodamia's yoke is of sadness or if it's caused by continuing fidelity to her absent spouse. These are valid options. But I also propose that the image is that she found herself in a position that she could not escape. So she goes from the height of love to a pit, which leads to her submission, which leads to perhaps a clandestine love affair. So, women are often described as doves, and that's the next thing that Catullus does. And he notes that women are supposed to look chaste, but often they're not, and that you can't judge a woman or a dove by its cover. But it does call the question, is she faithful or is she not? Well, we haven't seen our mistress in about 60 lines. She comes to him with Cupid fluttering behind, and the image is among the most richest and evocative in all Catullus' work. Wiseman tells us, and we all agree, that the coming of Lesbia is an epiphany of Venus with her son in attendance. Catullus writes another poem about a wedding where Venus attends, and he uses exactly the same vocabulary, almost exactly the same lines to describe their entrance to the wedding. So, in only 6 lines, Catullus manages to present the multifaceted nature of the beloved. She's virginal, like Laodamia, maternal or fertile, like Venus. She is officious, and she is his Era, 136, which is a synonym for Domina. And again, she's erotic. Final lines are important. Although lines 131 through 134 mimic the moments before the consummation of a marriage or a sacred ritual, Catullus' affair, remember, is not with his wife. She has many lovers. And he says of her, and she's often called Lesbia by him, which is not her real name, to protect her. He calls herself Venus. But even if she is not content with Catullus alone, they must tolerate the rare love affairs of a modest mistress, so we will not seem too annoying with silly behavior. So I'm not going to annoy her and cry when she cheats on me. So she's in charge. He's not in charge. This is the classic image of the Servus Amoris, the servant of love, who will endure anything at the hands of his domino. So Catullus' lover looks like a virgin. She walks in like a Mater, Venus, or Mater-Trix, like whom she behaves. Next, he offers Juno's tolerance of jokes and fidelities as proof of his refined attitude. Juno regularly endured the furtive affairs of Jove, but she did not typically suffer in silence, right? Just as Io would work out. The elegiac poet also laments the many loves of the mistress, but like Juno, he says he will submit and he will be faithful. Ironically, the beloved, unlike Jove and Juno, is not married to the poet. So technically, the poet's free to pursue another relationship, since during the astonishing night she gave secret little gifts stolen from her very husband's lap. The Domina is someone else's wife, but Catullus is content to meet her for stolen passion. Her identity as the matrona of another's household does not diminish her allure for him. The description of the mistress in poem 68 does not fold neatly into the verbal space Mater, someone else's wife, virgin, or Mater-Trix. Catullus continually skirts the issues of fidelity in marriage, but the mistress of Catullus elegy can never be encapsulated into a definite identity. In a single poem, Catullus' mistress embodies the Domina, Virgin, Mater, Trix types. The description of the beloved's actual image is brief. The majority of the poem is dedicated to images of other females who represent divergent characteristics. Domina, Virgin, Mater, Trix for mistress, Venus, Domina, Matrix, Mater, Laodamia, Virgin, potential mother, Hebe, Virgin, Mater, maybe, she just got married, we don't know what happened next. Helen, Matrix, Mater, Domina, and Juno, the mother and the Domina. Catullus' portrait of the Roman elegiac mistress shows the fractal image of woman during antiquity. It is from this platform that I and other scholars insist that we acknowledge the ever-changing nature of woman. Domina, Virgin, Mater, Trix is all-pervasive. It shapes our notions of gender, power, and subjectivity. The image of woman is not a static portrait etched onto literary and social memory like a stone monument's inscription. The face of woman has been and continues to be ever-changing. Pregnant with the impressions of the past, the notion woman proves, and this is what I say it proves, that it is possible for one to simultaneously embody different labels and ways of being. Likewise, all manifestations of woman are potent and desirable in the Lacanian sense. The feminine position is the driving force of humanity, and evidence of its viral, unyielding identity may be found in all literature, political, and social activism,
and any sign or logos connected to humanity. The works of antiquity offer the earliest written images of Domina-Virgin-Mater-Trix as measures of woman. These same types persist now, and like a connect-the-dot drawing, the traces of the feminine create and shore up an ever-shifting image of feminine subjectivity.